Most gardeners think worms show up because soil is healthy, but honestly, worms actually appear when the conditions are right. That misunderstanding, well, it wastes years. People add compost, buy worm castings, even introduce worms by hand, and nothing changes. The soil still feels lifeless, plants still struggle, and the worms disappear. The consequence is simple. Worms don't move into soil because you want them there. They move in because the environment stops trying to kill them. I've rebuilt beds where worms were completely absent and turned them into worm-heavy soil without adding a single worm. It came down to two things, and honestly, almost everyone gets at least one of them wrong. If you care about soil that improves on its own instead of needing constant help, you might want to subscribe early. That's what this channel's about. The first thing worms need is stable moisture, not constant watering. Worms don't chase water, they chase stability. Most gardens are either drying out completely or getting flooded and drying again. That swing is, well, hostile to worms. They breathe through their skin, and when soil dries too much or stays saturated, they either retreat deep or die. The mistake gardeners make is watering more often instead of fixing how soil holds water. Sprinkling every day keeps the surface wet, but the root zone unstable. When I wanted worms to return, I stopped focusing on frequency and started focusing on moisture retention. That meant keeping soil covered and improving structure, so water moved slowly and stayed evenly distributed. In raised beds, this meant watering deeply and then leaving the bed alone until the soil below the surface began to dry, not the surface itself. In ground beds, it meant breaking compaction and keeping residue in place year-round. Once moisture stopped swinging wildly, worms showed up on their own. Why mulch alone doesn't solve the moisture problem. Mulch helps, but only if the soil underneath can accept and hold water. On compacted or depleted soil, mulch just slows evaporation while water still runs off or drains too fast. That's why people say mulch didn't work for worms. It wasn't the mulch, it was the soil underneath. In beds where I mixed active organic matter into the top 5 or 6 inches, mulch suddenly became effective. Moisture stabilized, temperatures moderated, and worms moved in within a season. Moisture stability is not about surface wetness, it's about the environment 6 inches down. The second thing worms need is the right food, not more compost. This is where most advice goes wrong. Worms don't want finished compost. They want material in the middle of decay. Finished compost feeds plants. Worms feed on the microbes working on partially decomposed material. When gardeners add only finished compost, they're skipping the worm's food source. The compost disappears, plants respond briefly, and worms remain scarce. What consistently attracted worms was material that still had texture and structure. Leaf mold that wasn't fully broken down, aged straw, old bedding from animals, crop residues that were softened but recognizable. In practice, I worked this material lightly into the soil or laid it directly on the surface under mulch. Within weeks, worm channels appeared. You know, gardens that look tidy often lack worms. Bare soil, chopped residues removed, beds cleared completely between crops. That kind of environment just starves worms, plain and simple. Old gardeners, they understood this intuitively. Their fields were never truly bare. Something was always breaking down, always feeding the soil. In my own beds, honestly, the fastest way to lose worms was cleaning too aggressively. The quickest way to gain them? Well, that was leaving residue and letting decay happen right where the plants grow. Worms don't care about aesthetics, not at all. They care about food continuity. How moisture and food work together, not separately, is key. You can add food without moisture, and honestly, nothing happens. You can stabilize moisture without food, and again, nothing happens. Worms respond when both are present at the same time. That's just how it works. In one test bed, I added aged organic matter but left the soil exposed. It dried out and worms stayed away. In another bed, I mulched heavily but added no new organic material underneath. Worm activity increased slightly, then stalled out. but when both were addressed together, the response was dramatic. So, what does this look like in a small backyard garden? Let's take a closer look. In a typical backyard bed, what I do is add 1 bucket of partially decomposed organic matter per square meter, worked shallowly into the top few inches. I water deeply once and then cover the bed with a thick mulch layer, usually straw or leaf litter. After that, I don't disturb the soil again for weeks. No turning, no poking, just observation, really. Within a season, the soil texture changes. Within 2 seasons, worms are present even during dry periods. Raised beds make the effect obvious, but they also exaggerate mistakes. They dry faster and heat more. Still, they're also where worms return fastest when conditions are right. When I rebuilt raised beds with denser soil, active organic matter and consistent cover, worms colonized them without any inoculation. Beds built with light, fluffy mixes stayed mostly worm-free. Worms want protection and food, not airiness. Now, what about adding worms directly? Well, adding worms to hostile soil is pointless. They either leave or die. I've tested it myself. When conditions were right, I didn't need to add worms. They found the beds on their own. Even in areas where worms had been absent for years, that's the clearest indicator you've done it correctly. Why do fertilizers often repel worms? High-salt fertilizers, even organic ones used excessively, create osmotic stress for worms. The soil may grow plants faster, but worms avoid it. When I reduced soluble inputs and relied more on slow-cycling organic matter, worm populations increased naturally. Healthy worm soil is usually less pushed soil. How does this apply to hydroponic growers? Hydroponics removes soil, but the lesson still applies. Worm-rich soil produces plants with stronger, more adaptable roots. Those plants transition better into hydro systems. Worm activity builds resilience before plants ever see nutrient solutions. When to stop trying to attract worms? Once worms are present consistently, stop forcing conditions. Maintain cover, feed lightly, and let the system regulate itself. Overfeeding or overwatering at that stage often reduces populations instead of increasing them. Why are worms indicators, not tools? Worms don't fix soil because you added them. They appear because soil stopped being hostile. That distinction really matters. When worms show up, they're telling you the system is working. This is why old gardens were full of worms. They weren't managed aggressively. They were fed continuously and disturbed minimally. Moisture stayed relatively stable. That's not nostalgia, that's cause and effect. This is how worms become permanent residents, not through purchases, but through conditions. If this kind of practical, experience-tested knowledge helps you grow better food and build soil that improves on its own, subscribe to the Husbandry channel and share this video with someone still trying to attract worms by buying them instead of building the right environment. Real soil life follows the basics every time.